as the Foundation for Human Rights, we are currently calling upon civil society organizations to come forward and partner with the foundation to roll out this model. Currently, we are piloting it in 2 sites. One site is Orange Farm, which is a sort of peri-urban area, informal settlement / township. And the other site is called Tonga, which is a township / rural area. Tonga is in Mpumalanga province in the borders of Mozambique and Swaziland next to Komati Port and Namacha border post. It has also the highest levels of gender-based violence in South Africa. So in this program, we recognize that gender-based violence requires members of different stakeholders to work together in order to address this scourge. Masibambisane, it's a Zulu word which means unite, holding hands, or let's work together. Its aim is to facilitate a participatory model where communities are able to identify the key challenges that they are facing, and then work together to also find solutions to the key challenges that they are at hand. In that way, it becomes a self-empowering process to take agency in dealing with gender-based violence. Well, this slide is overcrowded, but the main goal of this program is to use innovative community-based models to address GBV. Anything, innovation in our view is that it's anything that the community define as innovative, then it then culminates to be a way in which they can deal with it. But using rights-based approaches, I'm sure the Deputy Director spoke about the panel model that is being used, which is an abbreviation for, so panel is participation, A is accountability, N is non-discrimination, E for the purpose of empowerment, L subject to the rule of law. So the L is for the law. So as I did mention maybe earlier, or if not, that during the TRC in South Africa, they found that impunity is a big problem for perpetrators. So if we are able together collectively through the Masibambisane to hold service providers or those that are responsible as duty bearers into account, then we are able to serve justice. That's why in the morning, earlier, just a few minutes ago, I asked you to be specific on your requirement, on your concern, as to where do you think people or someone is not accountable. Let's act on that. There's a buzzword these days, I'm sure it has been there for long, of active citizenry. You find it quite often in the NDP, which is the National Development Plan Vision 2030. So citizens are being reminded to be active, hence the word activism comes from. So we are being reminded, even from government documents, to be activists in the work that we do, in every point where we serve, to then take ownership of the challenges, because these challenges are not only, as the last speaker said, Advocate Aaron, if we are failing as a society, or if we are not happy as civil society, government is not happy, vice versa. And it's an issue which is a community issue, which is a societal issue, and it in fact distresses everyone. It makes everyone anxious. Rahadi mentioned yesterday as to, okay, now I'm told, how must I, what type of evidence must I try as much as possible to collect? It's like, now I'm given a recipe to ensure that at the end justice is served for me. And that's why then the House burst into tears. There was tension, because now the fear is that anyone, when they get out here, something can happen to them that is related to, so now I must then ensure that I scrape that person and get the DNA in my fingerprints, you know. under my nails so that it's going to be provided as evidence. So I've explained the panel approach. In the panel approach, certainly when we talk about participation, we're talking not from a concept that is not known in Africa, within the African concept. In Africa, or in many circles, I'm not sure now because people are a lot in their own phones. They don't really interact much. They interact somewhere in the air. But we had this principle of one-on-one talks, face-to-face talks, through storytelling, you know, through when we travel, wherever we walk, we share stories, we talk. But now I find quite often people, instead of talking to each other, they talk with their phones. So the communication is more digital than face-to-face. So perhaps the issue of bringing back the face-to-face communication, the human-to-human contact, is the one that will help us to embrace one another and see each other's faces. These days we marry each other knowing how we look like in physics, you know. We date online, we meet online, and we marry online. So something, then later you find, no, I married a wrong, or I got involved with a wrong friend, then ended up being trafficked or so. So the issue of building these communities where there is ongoing interaction between, I found that in this community where I've worked, Vrygrond in Western Cape, that they have what is called a street committee model. It's an informal settlement, but they actually know every person that visits and then leaves the homesteads of each street. If this week I'm going to have 5 friends that are coming from Limpopo, another 5 that's coming from Pakistan, everybody will know that we will be hosting. I'm the host, I'm the contact. They are coming to South Africa, maybe to seek asylum or to seek employment, whatever the issue is, because even internally we migrate for opportunities. I'm a migrant here, I'm from Mpumalanga, so I'm an internally displaced person because of, of the fact that I cannot get work that I'm skilled to do in Mpumalanga, then I'm displaced here. So we migrate for many reasons. So in that community, when the xenophobia attacks resurfaced in 2008, or started in 2008, the recipe which has been articulated as the one that influences people to be violent against migrants or refugees, it was all there, compressed, but people never attacked anyone. In that settlement, you have every person from every province. It means you have people who are speaking all the 11 South African languages from all the provinces of South Africa, but also you have every person that comes from Africa, which is the other 53 countries that we have. But xenophobia never happened, irrespective of the economic conditions in that area. And why it didn't happen, we found that because people know each other, when the youth wanted to attack the so-called migrants or refugees, the old mama said, no, you can't. And the other elderly men said, no, you can't attack Malon. Malon was one of the cases we studied. You can't attack Malon. Malon, we know him. He's a respectable community member. He works for Soreso in the garden up in Constantia, that rich, affluent area. So we know Malon. You can't attack Malon. And the looting in the spider shop, no, you can't loot because the products are much more lesser, and this is what we can afford economically. So it never happened. So it showed in that model that if people have a way, a structure in which they look after each other, and it's organized and it's reflected every week, 2 streets meet. But they are representatives for each street. So they have street committees that then share this information, and they have a higher circle where all the streets are represented by 1 person per street committee member. So we thought that was innovative. And some Danish institution came to study that and documented it, and it became one of the success story. So also in this model, if people are united together to deal with the scourge, then solutions are found in a way that is servicing the will-be victim or the already existing survivors. So how is this model rolled out? It starts by meeting community members and finding out who are the key stakeholders in the area, and then so basically map the needs that are available or are at hand, challenging the community. I'm requesting one staff member of the FHR to respond to this phone. Maybe somebody is coming here. Funeka or Mahlangu. So in this mapping exercise, the stakeholders and the community members come together to identify what are the key challenges in the community where they are. I will tell you what we found in Orange Farm. So there's no criteria who should participate. So people of different age groups, different gender identities, schools, crèches, churches, clubs, societies, small businesses or businesses that are there, civic structures, traditional structures, any institution that is the clinics, healthcare centers, police service units, they are all called to come together. Then key to this is to identify amongst yourself who can be the community, the organization that becomes a contact point, maybe for FHR or for any other person for this type of a structure. And sorry, this is mixed up. And in that arrangement, you have someone in the group that is a coordinator or someone who can be the liaison person with external stakeholders. But also within the group, the different stakeholders that you put together, you must have some form of an agreement, either in a memorandum of understanding or memorandum of it's MOA or MOU. How it has worked in other areas is that human rights clubs then are formed in schools, where, for example, when we designed this program, we were responding to a video that went viral in KwaZulu-Natal where an educator was having sexual intercourse with learners. So it's a good institution to work with in order to deal with, because children at their age, they are very, very vulnerable from primary school. In fact, when we started in Orange Farm, there was a big news headline in one of the primary schools in Soweto where 57% of the girl learners were pregnant. And that's a primary school, October last year, Sowetan, that's the point of reference. And we also asked the learners why is it happening, why there is this type of an issue in your school, or and it was very interesting. They indicated a lot of things, the issues of blessers, the issues of being seen in the family as, you know, a way in which they can generate income by giving their children to other, you know, men to then provide for the economic needs of the family. Hence, one of the participants, I think during lunch hour, indicated to me that if you are able to liberate every person, especially women, economically, then you are able to deal with the scourge, because often the economics becomes the issue where vulnerabilities are. So we found, when we did the mapping exercise in Orange Farm, that one of the main challenges that they are facing is bullying, and it's happening in schools. And secondly, we also had a group from from faith-based organizations. They mentioned that in their churches, the main problem is rape, and there's silence around rape in the churches. And thirdly, they mentioned femicide, which is now called intimate partner violence and killings, where people who are together, either as boyfriends, girlfriends, or girlfriends, and so on, they then kill each other because of disagreements and, possessiveness, a range of issues that are culminating to this stage. Gangsterism also and drug abuse. And the critique here was the fact that in almost every street and next to schools, there is these shebeens. And wondering, the people that give licenses to trade in alcohol, if they do consider the location or the site where this alcohol is being sold. So once we were able to find out what the issues were, we were then asking participants, because in the areas where we work, PowerPoint does not exist. It's very, very under a tree type of a scenario meeting or a shack or a community hall. So you may not have a printer or we use resources that are available in this regard to evaluate how people were feeling about this program, the design of it, and how to take it forward. We use just pieces of papers on the floor to indicate faces that are happy or dissatisfied or just average. So we had two types of feedback, which was those who felt that they are average. I think you can see there's two groups here. In the middle, there's just a gap on the photo on the right, on the left. So those that were standing on the left, extreme left, were those that were saying they are very happy, and the other group on the left was saying they are just averagely impressed about the program. So moving forward, it's anticipated that the program will be refined and ensure that at the end, everybody feels that they are living in a gender-based free zone under the Masibambisane Stop Gender-Based Violence program. This is just a photo of this program when we were rolling out in KZN. Dr. Segi was doing the day one instead of Dr. Steve. But the next steps now is to ask civil society organizations and maybe other institutions who are interested 4 questions which they will then send to this email address. But the questions are, what is the scale of the problem in your community? The idea is that once you answer this question, you send them to the foundation, and then they will look into ways in which they can support you to set up the same model. The presentation is available on via email. We can print to those who don't have access, but it's responding to these 4 questions. What perpetuates or drives gender-based violence in your community? In your view, who are the critical stakeholders that need to be involved in this project in your community when you're doing your mapping and putting the stakeholder group together? And then brief motivation why your organization will be the best to implement this model. Today is a special day, more special, because the advocate is here who is a coordinator for the street law program. So the material that you've seen in front of you in the pack, that's in a folder. Street law has been put together by her, but also Lindy, there's a manual. There's a manual that her unit has put together, which is being used by a range of service providers to deliver their services diligently. This manual as the foundation, we are giving it at no cost to civil society organizations that are here today. So access to knowledge, right to education, right to information must be made standardized and mainstream, not commercialized. Ne? Yeah. Education is public good. Crimes against women and children, a medical legal guide. Now, this is the second part. If you can prove beyond reasonable doubt as a government institution that you really need this, you work in areas where it's overcrowded, quite often the services, you don't have resources, then we will give it to you. But we have to know the story ourselves on our side so that we can motivate why we gave it to you. So that becomes the extended requirement in terms of burden of proof for government officials. So this is street law, trying to introduce the advocate COETZEE. She is a senior lecturer at the Law Faculty of Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University. She holds a B.Juris degree, LLB, LLM, and is an admitted advocate of the High Court. She has published numerously and in also research manuals on corporate law, insolvency law, and human rights, and has delivered conference papers internationally. In addition to her position as a senior lecturer, LINDI is the National Director of Street Law, which is a non-profit company that specializes in presenting participatory legal, human rights, and democracy education to the general public. LINDI established the Street Law NMMU outreach program in 1992 at the former University of Port Elizabeth. She has been a member of Street Law delegation that was involved in the successful negotiation for the inclusion of human rights education into the school curriculum. Talking of the inclusion of human rights education in the school curriculum, the Foundation for Human Rights is currently designing and about to roll out an animation series of the Bill of Rights, which is going to be available online, through social media, through lessons. It's very interactive. It uses cartoons. So it's a way of also, me being introduced in being a digital native. So we will keep you updated because I see you nodding. I told you we have digital natives in the room, so they hear this language, right? LINDI, in addition to being the expert that was involved in negotiating human rights education in the school curriculum, she has represented the Human Rights Commission as part of the national standard body for the health sciences and social sciences within the national qualification framework. She was once a deputy chairperson and an executive committee member for this committee, which is part of the Department of Basic Education. She has been one of the female representatives for Africa and on the steering committee for Global Access to Justice Alliance between 2010 and 2013. She has been actively involved up to today in training and conducting workshops in disadvantaged communities during, for the past 27 years. In fact, her CV is very long. I tried to summarize. It was stretching up to 45 pages. But lastly, she has extensively trained in the formal and informal sector and recently returned from Fiji, where she was providing such training.
Sarah, just Lindy. Thank you very much. And thanks for having me. It's a very nice big crowd that we have here today. You know what saddens me? All of us have seen what happened to Babes with Dumo, haven't we? Yes. You know, when I look at it, it shows the reality of domestic violence. But what saddens me is Babes is famous. Riva was famous. They have a following. What about the lady that lives next to you that's not famous or knows a lot of people, that is in that kind of situation? And I think from the outcry that we've seen in the last week when the video leaked, it just saddens me that we have such a reaction when it's a celebrity. Yes. But there are so many other women that find themselves in the same situation. And it's like, you know, people say in August, you go to places and you get service. And everybody takes it seriously because it's Women's Month. We have to take it seriously. What about the other 11 months of the, you know? It's just, every day is supposed to be free from violence. You're not supposed to hit. So with this, just a couple of comments. Let me ask you, we're going to do an introductory thing. Normally what Street Law, we'd like to do interactive things. We don't just talk and you are not empty vessels that I need to fill up. You come with your prior knowledge. Can I ask you just to speak to the person sitting next to you, to answer two questions for me. One thing, name one thing that you know about women and violence. Okay, that's your first question. Name one thing that you know about women and violence. And your second question, name one thing that frustrates you about women and violence. Okay, just for yourself. There's no right or wrong answers here, just so that we can get into the understanding of where we are. What is it that you know about women and violence? And is there maybe something that frustrates you about women and violence? I'm just going to give you 2 minutes to speak to your colleagues. All right. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I know there's a lot that we can talk about, but we're also pressured for time. Can I have a couple of volunteers who want to tell me one thing that came up that you know about women and violence? Ma'am.
One thing I know for sure is that it's the only crime that blames the victim.
This is something that came up on social media with the Babes Wadumo thing, the people that were asking, what did she do to provoke him? Yeah, so very, very valid question to say, okay, there's victim blaming in this instance. What else? Anybody want to add? Yes, ma'am.
You know, in terms of women and violence, you can't separate the two because you see a woman, you see violence. I think for me that's really, yeah, that's what frustrates me also. That you see a woman, it's automatically you see violence, that women are vulnerable there.
I'm TVM Penda from Domestic Workers Empowerment League. I see violence as a form of power. is founded on the basis of power. It's a demonstration that I've got power over you. And in most cases, where you find that people become victims, it's because maybe the power is in a form of money, social, economy. And I know that if I don't succumb to your power, then you're going to remove the money. And I depend on that. But then for us to move these women from this situation, which is a vicious circle, where it ends up destroying even the kids, is to say, it's either we educate them, it's either you go out, get a skill, and get your own money. And in most cases, you find that they don't even know that I'm already contributing more. Because, I mean, there are very few women who don't have a skill of selling something and put a plate on the table. But they always think that if you bring me that extra 1,000, when I'm already bringing 5,000, therefore your 1,000 is important. And then the last one, I think violence begins at home. I wanted to make a comment yesterday to say, if all women who are mothers of these rapists take these very rapists to the police station, then you will say, yes, I do not support violence. You will see that a person will rape someone, but you'll find their mothers there supporting them. So, I mean, as mothers, what are we saying to groom our sons? I mean, for me, it's really, we can, as mothers, try to work to say, no, violence is not acceptable. It starts at home. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Preeti from Action Support Center. I think for me, what I know about women in violence is the fact that it has become a norm. Women now feel as if when that happens, they feel as if they've done something wrong. And they think I remember in KZN, I was speaking to some of the women, and they were saying, no, I think I'm the one who was wrong. I think I did something to provoke him, you know. So the fact that it has been going on for so long, and women now, it has already reduced their self-esteem. They don't see themselves, you know, having the power that my sister was talking about. It's quite sad. And the frustrating part of it is the withdrawal of cases in courts as a result of the same reasons. The money, you know, the fact that I cannot look after my kids on my own. It's just frustrating. And the fact that men also are not doing enough to educate other men about this.
Great. Okay, thank you. There's a hand there at the back. Oh, thank you, ma'am. There's one. We're coming to that one.
Okay. The one that frustrates more is jealousy. Usually when the woman starts picking her life up, a man becomes jealous. Even women begin to get jealousy, say things to your partner about yourself, your history, how you dress, your confidence. It perpetuates because I feel men are intimidated by strong women. If you can be able to put your ideas to the table and make a success out of them, then they become intimidated. The way you dress, it always counts against us as women, especially when we report cases of HIV. I don't know. The fact that we are hard workers by nature. We are very much hard workers. So we cannot allow ourselves to, back in the day, women used to succumb on anything. Just be there and be a yes. But right now, as women, we're trying to pick ourselves up. Hence now you see the rise on gender-based violence, because now we're able to put our ideas, we're able to work hard, we're doing things for ourselves. Now men can see what we have as women that was hidden. So even our justice system, it is not assisting us in any way, because every time you go and report a case, you are being first scanned, and how you dress, how you look, how you talk. Because you're expected if you're going to say, my husband just did this to me, and you talk bravely, then they think maybe you have done something to provoke him. From the police station first. Even at families, our families don't even believe us when we say, you know, this guy, he's sweet, as you can see, but he's an abuser. They take time because as women, we are not expected to say those things. You're supposed to just keep quiet. So this cycle, I don't know how we're going to end it because it's just a matter of accepting that as women, we are now out there. We are now showing the potential that we have. Then they have to just adapt with it. Because if we can put together our minds, I believe we can make a better world.
I think if I can just, while we're going to that lady, you know what struck me as the shuttle driver picked me up at the airport this morning and asked me, what are you talking about today? So I said, domestic violence. And he says, but you know what? Culturally, my wife cannot talk back to me. I'm like, okay. And I said, and then I engaged him and I talked about the Constitution and about equality. But if you do research into cultures, every culture has one thing in common, and that's respect. I think the practices that have evolved is just sometimes so convenient to say, yeah, but it's my culture that allows it. And when the lady spoke last week, there was a magistrate that said to a victim, but you'll get used to it after a while. Hello, this is the person that's supposed to be helping, the unbiased person that must adjudicate, that advises. You get used to it. So what we are doing is not really helping in a sense. Let's hear from that lady.
You know, my frustration is the non-violent abuse that comes forth. It's very rife. Emotional and financial abuse, sort of a white-collar crime, and people never talk about it. It's a silent abuse when women or anybody who's abused, even men, they never talk about it because nobody sees it and nobody hears it. It's very difficult to deal with it.
And also yesterday, Prof. Steve gave you a lot of graphics and things. With physical abuse and sexual abuse, there's evidence. There could be injuries. Whereas when you deal with emotional abuse and financial abuse, it's not that you can visualize the injury. You can't attach something that will give you that additional proof in a court of law. Thanks, Millicent. Yes.
What frustrates us more, or me more, as a police officer, it's when you got a complaint, you attend that complaint, the neighbors, they called for that complaint, you attend. When you went there, it's a domestic violence. You know, we went to that shack and we opened that shack. We found this lady, she was bleeding with a child. The man was there. So we wanted to arrest that man. Then the woman said no. You know, it's since that in between, it doesn't go away because we are facing challenges and in a different way. So if something happened to someone, it won't happen to you. So it's very complicated about these issues of domestic violence, and are sensitive and are painful because sometimes we want to take the decision for you or for that woman, but at the end of the day, though that woman and the child, they will suffer, we won't be there anymore. As people are saying that you must go to police and you must go to police station, but person be arrested after that person has been arrested. As you and your children, what are you going to eat? Where are you going to stay? These issues are very sensitive and are very touching. So we must respect each and every story because they are not the same. But we must support, we must guide, we must teach our children while they're still in school about this domestic violence. Women and men. I heard someone talk about only men, even women. There are women that are abusing their husband, and then there are men that are getting raped. So because of never be there, you think that men are not being raped.
They put on a smile, they put on lipstick, they put on makeup, and they go out there and say all is well, yet they are being abused and violated every day of their lives. Until the worst comes or happens, that's when the world will know that this woman was not happy, this woman was abused. Thank you.
There's a gentleman at the back there that we haven't had a gentleman say something, so let's give the gentleman a chance.
Of course, to me, what frustrates me is more about the issue of education in general. And why I'm trying to say that education, and I think I'll build from the police officer there. Okay. When we speak the issue of, okay, from yesterday I've been listening to the conversation, including what you've been saying, but what stuck in my mind more was, we need to understand where we come from. But where we come from is not an excuse of saying that we can abuse or what. As a man, I'm putting in one place. One challenge is, for over the years, we've been abusing men, okay, we've been abusing women. And women have been empowered through that. There was a couple of how do you deal with that emotion, how do you empower yourself, how do you go through the process. But now, power has shifted. Power is more on the women's side, where maybe me, men, I used to be financial, muscle, I'm powerful, I can go to work, whatever you want, I will provide. If I want, I can. If I don't want, I cannot. But now, women can go to work, gain even more than me. Your salary is more than mine. You come home, you speak more. I will speak from my own experience. My wife gained more than me. Let's not go because I can hear wow. Let me speak from my own experience. I'm in the family where my wife's salary is most 5 times than mine. Okay. So, as a man, I'm not empowered to deal with that kind of situation. Now, I'm not even empowered in terms of going to my wife and say, give me 100 rand to put petrol in the car. My wife is empowered in asking me. But me, I'm not in that situation because I know what, as a man, I'm not supposed to ask a woman. As a man, I must provide. As a man, I must do this. But now, it's come in a bigger challenge. In terms even of the family problem, how do we handle it? Do we manage a family? As a man, am I empowered to understand that if my wife has maybe a nice job, can I supplement my wife maybe to say, I can help with house duty. When my wife is not there, I can pick children, I can maybe cook, and my wife will come from work, find food cooked or what. I'm not prepared to that. So, you see all the frustration where I'm coming on. When we apply for a job, the woman is more likely to get that job than me, man. So, in one extent, we shouldn't ignore education. Education is very important one place on one. Whatever we say, awareness is still written on that. Okay.
We cannot reimagine a society where we contribute whatever we can and we remain equal human beings. But let me go back to what frustrates me actually. I'm just trying to respond to the gentleman. We have to reimagine our society, my brother. What frustrates me is that if you listen to discussions around gender-based violence, especially rape,
our fight to end it is not as strong as the fight to have a right to beat up our children. You know, if you listen to parents calling into the radio, they want a right to beat up our children. And what frustrates me is that we don't link that right to beat up our children and the issue of gender-based violence. So we need to do the links. We can live in a society where we don't beat up our children and they become better people. So we need to go back and understand, especially in this country, especially black people who are dispossessed, who are violated in all respects, and we fight for the right to beat up our children. We're here because there was a right to violate us. We need to reimagine ourselves with children we bring up without beating them up.
Thank you. Last comment. Okay, I know people have lots of comments, but we'll look for this.
It can happen to everybody, anyone else, which is why we see even those women that we feel like perhaps middle class or whatever, anybody can suffer, even business women. So it happens to anyone at any given time, and various forms of violence happen on a daily basis, either rape, femicide, domestic violence, psychological violence that somebody actually mentioned, the non-violent abuse, the one that is not actually overt. But also we are frustrated by the overemphasis of evidence based prosecution within the justice system, which actually, to us, we feel like it re-victimizes the patient, not only re-victimizing, re-traumatized, and at the same time, that could be the reason why they drop cases in some instances, because unfortunately society normally doesn't really believe the victim in such a way that the moment, I think we have noted, those who were following the Motos case, we realized how some people were beginning even to judge, like my sister at the back there indicated that people begin to judge you, to say, what were you, how were you dressed up when you were raped, you deserve, it's like, you have to, comply to certain norms of society as to how should a woman dress. And I think it touches a bit about my brother there, but I wouldn't want to respond to him right away because I want us to move. But I think this stereotyping that women have to be in this particular position and location within the economic sectors, social sectors, in such a way that we can't believe it, that women can be CEO women could get married to a gardener. So perhaps, let me end there. All right. But I would like, really, I'm glad that at least we have very important stakeholders in this room that would actually help us to address the policy and law issues, especially when it comes to evidence-based prosecution. I'm very worried. I know we can't change the law overnight, but it's a process. Thank you.
I got the mic here.
I thought I said that is the last comment. Apparently not.
Men speak now. It's about time that men come to their senses and not hide behind this cultural whatever. I think what frustrates me as well is that, urban areas, I'm from the northwest, in the rural areas, inequality, especially when it comes to provide, the provision of constitution for women to be assisted. I think the justice system has let women down big time. And What more if the women in urban areas who have access and who have privilege to resources, infrastructures. What about the women in the villages? You know, if we don't combine that and take it holistically as a problem that we encounter in this world for women issues, then I think we must also acknowledge that we leave some other women behind. Thank you.
There is a lot of issues and a lot of knowledge in the room about what women are experiencing. But I think this lady captured it so correctly. Domestic violence doesn't discriminate. It doesn't know class, it doesn't know race, nationality, anything. So one mustn't, and I think this is part of our society, is this preconceived ideas that we have of what life should be like. We all stereotype, okay? You can sit here and just think to yourself how you react to certain people. Just if you come to if you're driving, for example, and you come to a robot, okay? You're in Gauteng after all. How many of you check that your doors are locked? No. So, yes, it's a safety thing as well, but what does that say? We presuppose that everybody standing at that robot is potentially a criminal. Yeah. Who of you here has had a daughter bring a boyfriend home? Or date someone that you didn't approve of? Maybe because he wasn't acceptable. Isn't that so? Yeah. Comes in there with tattoos. Smokes. So we all do those kind of things. And once one gets, I think once you're sensitive to the fact that everybody can stereotype, then you sort of think, why am I reacting this way? Am I prejudging people simply by the way that they appear? Then we all do that same thing. And ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about, there are dynamics that around women. Part of the frustrations that I have not had, and I'm sure it would have come out of the room, is the fact that victims don't leave. Okay? One big frustration when you work with, and we've done this program since the 90s, one of the biggest frustration that you hear is, like the lady from the police that said, you get there, she has a protection order, she's bleeding. Now she says, no, don't arrest him. No. What are we expecting from the police? The police's job is clear. The Domestic Violence Act says if there is assault, arrest. But now she comes, she said, no, I had a client like this, let me tell you. So police would come there and say, no, don't arrest him. Ma'am, what do you then want us to do? Just talk to him. Said, but why? You have the open warrant of arrest. Now I'm scared he's going to be raped in the prison cells. And so I'm sure if we go around the room, there are many things that we're thinking. The police has one job. They have to prevent and react to crime. And they have to do it in a particular way. The police isn't the psychologist that can speak to him. Or you speak to a lawyer or an NPO providing legal services to victims. Then you would come and she would say to you, you know, he hit me again last night. I want you to write him a letter. Then you ask, ma'am, what must I write in this letter? No, man, just tell him if he does it again, I'm going to divorce him. And then you have to sit with the victim and say, but you do realize that that's not going to change anything. And if it's even a lawyer that you are paying, that lawyer is going to take a truckload of money for a letter that is not, because lawyers are trained. The lawyer wants to draft the papers for the divorce. We're not trained to deal with the tears. You have the tissues there and you say, you know, I understand, but my training is there are legal remedies. I can help you apply for a protection order. I can institute a divorce. That's what we do. But if you want somebody to talk to, you're going to need to go to the psychologist. The lawyer is not the right person to do that. So in this, like you looked at yesterday, when you looked at the forensic and the evidence that is being collected, all of that, every role player in this chain of evidence has a specific purpose. And I think a lot of the times, when we get to these workshops, and you'll often hear the NPA saying, and I'm sure there are people from the NPA and from SAPS and whoever, I love you all, but I'm going to say what I'm going to say. The NPA will say, yes, but the police. The police will say, yes, but we don't have a van. We don't have petrol. We don't have enough people. The medical professionals, the forensic nurses, and the doctors will say, we haven't got rape kits. Sound familiar? We have to phone the police to collect the rape kit. These are the kind of things. Do you see what is happening here? In the circle, there is so much help needed, and there are dynamics that people have resorted to blaming. And while I can blame this one and that one, then I don't have to look at the fault in myself of what am I as a role player doing to address this particular violence. But what we also need to address is we mustn't put expectations on role players that they are not trained there for. It's like phoning the police, I have a snake in my house. Really? Now, what do you think the police must do? Do you understand? And people do that. People do that, and we tend to, and I think that is, there are NGOs, there is social development, and yeah, of course, we all know social development doesn't work over time. But we need to make sure that we channel it in the correct way, that we go to the right place. Otherwise, we are going to be the ones that are saying, yeah, but that policeman or that prosecutor or that judge or that doctor, you know. The one thing I want to say to NGOs is the legal process is not a healing process. You cannot even tell a victim that she's going to be better afterwards. If you counsel that victim and you talk with her beforehand, you have to prepare her for what is happening. That she doesn't, because there is secondary trauma. That is a given fact. Because of the nature of our legal system, there has to be evidence that is there. You can't get away from that. But I think sometimes we fail victims because we think the justice system is going to make it all right. And sometimes it simply doesn't. So I think the one thing before we get into the human rights is just to understand the victim has a right to open and honest and upfront information. If you are working, then be clear about what can be expected from the prosecutor. Be clear about what is the duty of the legal aid attorney. That legal aid attorney is going to cross-examine her. And it's not going to be nice. I think that is a reality that we can't get away from. So if you want to provide a service, you prepare your victim that what is about to come is not going to be a comfortable experience. And then sometimes if the evidence isn't there, he might walk. And you still sit with counseling the victim because the fact that he's acquitted does not necessarily mean it didn't happen. It just means that there wasn't sufficient evidence to secure a conviction. And those are the harsh realities that we have to work with. But what I want to explain to you, and before we start, is this thing about domestic violence. There are 3 role players. There's 3 roles in a domestic violence situation. You get the victim. Let me call him the perpetrator. You get 3 parties in any abusive relationship. There's a victim, there's a perpetrator, and there is a rescuer. And the one thing that you have to realize is these roles change. If you are not aware of it, you can, as a professional, fall into the trap of becoming one of these. Let me explain to you. On Friday night, she gets beaten. The police is called by the neighbors. Ne? The police come out, they arrest him. She's clearly the victim. He's done the hitting, he's the perpetrator. What is the police? Ne? Monday morning, she walks into that charge office and she says, "You must let him go." Why? My children are hungry at home. Who's going to bring money back in order to buy food? You must let him go. Now, is she still the victim? Who's the victim now? The man, the abuser. What is she? And what is the police suddenly? Huh? Let's take another example. In your files, there's a case of domestic violence there in some of the notes. You find it often with neighbors, okay? Because where do you run to? You run to your neighbor for help, okay? The neighbor calls the police, or the neighbor gives her a place to sleep, all right? Now, you need to understand something else to understand how even the neighbor can become the perpetrator. There's a cycle. It always follows this, okay? You will have that impact phase when he assaults, or when he verbally abuses, or he locks her in the house and goes to work, or doesn't provide her with the money to look after the children, okay? That's the impact phase. At this stage, after this, he's at his most vulnerable. Okay? Then comes the honeymoon phase. After he's now assaulted or abused, now he's scared she might leave. Okay? He's scared she might leave because he doesn't know what she's going to do. Now he says he's sorry. He goes and speaks to the priest. He becomes a man of the church. And for a slight moment there, he is everything she dreamt that he would always be. He does the dishes, he helps with the kids. Not so? The honeymoon phase. Eh? But that can't last. Slowly but surely there are little irritations creeping in. He doesn't help with the kids anymore. The dinner is not ready when she gets home late from work. Okay? So then you have this. Slowly that tension builds up again. And you have the tension building phase. And with this tension building phase leads to what? The impact phase. And that is always the cycle. Now, at this impact phase, the neighbor helps. Ne? Then he goes and he's miraculously cured. Next week, the neighbor says, come for a braai. The neighbor doesn't want to go for a braai. They don't like the man. And now suddenly it's, what's wrong with you? You don't want a braai. And see, what is the poor neighbor then? Because she's now not experiencing this honeymoon, you see. And as professionals working in this field, we owe it to ourselves. We owe it to ourselves to be on the watch for these roles and these building phases. Because it is at this time that she comes and she withdraws the charges. Nah? Let's talk about us women, and I include myself. We like projects. We like projects. We start dating. We say, okay, there's a little crack here or there, but don't worry. As soon as this thing's on my finger, I'll fix it. Ladies. Ladies, a relationship or a marriage is not a rehab institute. You don't fix people. It's not your job. It's not your job. But that's the most difficult thing. The lady, one of the ladies here said, she thinks it's her fault. That's right. Because if it's my fault, I can fix my faults, can I not? But if it's somebody else's fault, I can't fix it. And that's what the difficult thing is to understand. But hello, it's not your fault. It's not your fault, but the realization of, okay, I have no control over those insecurities. I cannot fix it. Otherwise, you will find yourself into becoming a party of this particular cycle. And one has to understand it. And NGOs working with victims of violence, I think if you speak to the police or to the prosecutors when it comes to domestic violence, one of the biggest frustrations countrywide that comes out is, You arrest, she withdraws. All right? What does that mean for NGOs and civil society working with it? You can't force her to leave. That is the reality. If you look at all the comments on social media with Babes Wodumo, if you looked at Riva Steenkamp, there is a chance that Babes will go back. There's a very big chance that she will go back. She deleted that video. So the behavior is already showing that. But it's our natural reaction to, come, let's fix this. But it's not our decision. And that is what is so frustrating. You do all of this work, and then she goes back. Let me ask you the next question before we go into the human rights of this. Why do you think women stay? They say, statistically, average woman will leave 7 times before she really leaves. The majority of women never leave. Why do you think they don't leave? Why do women stay? Ma'am.
I felt like I also owed it to my children to stay in that marriage. So it was very painful, but I stayed. And I kept on convincing myself, I'm doing it for my kids, you know. And eventually the kids left the house and they asked me, we are leaving, why are you still here? That's when I eventually had to leave, because they faced me and said, you said you're staying for us now, we are leaving, you have to get out of this. And it's so peaceful, so if you're sitting there, get out, it's nice to get out.
But some other women, they say, but I still love him.
Yeah, that's true. Ah, we're still so infatuated. It's a reality. Don't ask me as a trained lawyer to understand that feelings of love, but it's there and you cannot deny it. And remember, when it's the honeymoon phase, it's really good. Yes, ma'am. Oh, okay, thank you.
I will not repeat what others have said already about kids and family, but also the other lady that I was talking to recently, just 3 days ago, who's going through, like, not physical abuse, but financial abuse, in other words. And her reason is, who's going to marry me after I've had 3 kids? What am I going to do? I've been married to this person for 17 years. So she can't imagine a life after.
She can't imagine a life after.
Yeah, so it's quite, and it's very, you don't know how even to cancel or how to really, because she feels that this is the end. I'll have to be here until the end.
That's sad, eh? That's sad.
You know, I see a lot of things playing out here. The other one is self-esteem. I mean, that is the one for me. And which, of course, is about lack of confidence. Which leads to say, the society is going to say this about me, stigma, and so forth. But the other one, which I think is grounded from who we are, is socialization. In our culture, there are so many metaphors that says you cannot move on. Like, for instance, there is one which is very famous. In fact, I based my dissertation around it. Mosadi utwara tipa abo hamin. Meaning a woman is compelled, it's not her choice, you are compelled to hold a knife by its sharp edge. Yes. And in Venda, which is mine, they say, Musadzi u faralu dongo nga hubisaho am Venda. Dongo is something like a pen. They say, even if it's hard, you must hold it. So it's about that. Then because you're socialized to understand that this is where I'm supposed to be. If I go out, the stigmas, it's about self-confidence. When you have that esteem, then I think you can move on. But you can help through what? Education.
No, that's true. There's another hand there.
Another reason why they don't leave is because they don't want to give the other woman the satisfaction of having won the man. That's one of the reasons that they'll give you. Even when, in cases where maybe the family has been called for intervention, they will tell the wife, but why do you want to satisfy the other woman? She's the enemy here. He's your husband. He's done this for you. He's been there for 15 years and all that. So it's another thing why women stay in such relationships.
And the perception that there is no perfect relationship outside there. So even if I can live here, I don't have a guarantee that wherever I'm going, there are no problems. So I'd rather stick around with this one that I know that when he's angry, he will beat me, I will cry, and I'll go to sleep, and tomorrow is another day. So that's one of the perceptions. The other one, I also wanted to say, abuse is not every day because of the cycle that is happening. So for that one day honeymoon phase, it's worth me staying in this relationship because I'm going to get roses, I'm going to get chocolates. Life is going to be different. So I stay hoping that that honeymoon phase might even extend and ends up taking a larger portion of our lifestyle than the abuse itself. And then the last one that I want to substantiate on the fact that one of my colleagues said, they say I still love the person. When we're talking about two people, we're talking about emotions and feelings. And those are not tangible things that we can pack like our clothes, our shoes, you know, our handbags. You know, it's sentimental issues, and it's not easy for me to say, today I decide to pack my heart and put it in my handbag and go. So feelings fluctuate and they are not the same every day. Today I'm angry, but tomorrow I'm feeling much better. So for that reason, I will stay in that abusive relationship.
You stay through the tough times and you kind of like convince yourself that this is a phase, it will end and then things will be better. And also because abusers are not dumb. They are not stupid people. So they're very manipulative in their behavior. They don't start abusing you in the beginning. So they first lay the foundation of, you know, being the lovey-dovey guy, posting on social media and showing your family that they're overly compassionate and loving and all that. And also with that base, then it becomes hard to leave because that is where you started, with the manipulation, with the convincing that this person is a good person. So sometimes when you think, oh no, they're not a good person, they're hurting me, you go back to the feeling that in the beginning. And what you were also saying about the cycle of always going back to the honeymoon phase. A lot of the times, abusers are also very narcissistic. So when you try to leave, they'll beg, grovel, cry, and do all these threaten to hurt themselves, or if you have children, and all these behaviors that convince you to stay. And also they deal with with your confidence. They tell you that you are nothing without me. What are you going to do? Who's going to want your damaged goods? Who's going to want you afterwards? Then you stay out of fear, out of the fact that you have been beaten out of who you are, the person that you are from the core. You've forgotten who you are, and all these things, and the fact that you'll be shamed if you go back home, right? You are a return soldier, as some people call divorced women. The shaming that we also do. Ooh, she could have lost 10 years in a marriage, who does she think she is? And all these things. It's not one issue, it's a lot of issues. It's us, it's our families, it's what the abusers do to us, but it's also the kind of attitudes that we have normalized in society around abuse and what abused women have to do to survive.
for me to stay in an abusive marriage, it starts with an educational content that I get from home. If at home I am taught to that if you are a girl child, you need to be cleaning after the boy child, then it means that the educational content within the cultural aspect, it lacks. And then if it means that if I'm going to church, and then my pastor would then preach for me and say, "Kuzofi isikhathi lapho abantu abafazi abo-5 bashayela day one." They are perpetuating that we need to live to share, or we need to live under these circumstances of being abusive. Why do we need that we stay in these relationships? Another aspect that we need to be looking at is the thing of Bazotin syndrome. If you do not love you, if you lack what we call self-love, how am I going to love you? Love yourself first, and then I will also love you. And then it becomes to say, if you love yourself more, you'll be able to realize that these are what we call the abusive patterns, or these are the abusive cycles. This person carries 1, 2, 3 abusive points within him. So I'll be able to say, I love myself more, but I'm living.
More than a third of women killed by their intimate partners were killed after they had left. So leaving itself doesn't secure you.
I would like to share, not generalizing, specifically on a personal experience. One of the reasons that I stayed for 11 years in an abusive relationship was the background where I'm coming from. Usually, if a man knows what kind of a family that you're coming from, they take advantage. As women in that situation, you are more vulnerable. So if you don't have enough support, or just one person who will believe you when you say, this man is abusing me, it's very hard to believe, because you're asking yourself, if I decide to go out, I cannot be isolated, as vulnerable as I am. You go to the people that you believe they are hired to protect you, which is the police. The first thing that will ask you, are you married? They respond to me, yes. For how long? You will tell them. Instead of opening the case with the bruised face, the blood dripping down, they will call the perpetrator, they will call the families, send you to mediation. Hence I asked that question yesterday. Then you'll be sitting around the table, resolving this issue. But before you go to the police, you have exhausted the roundtable discussions with family, with friends, and you resorted to the police, knowing that they don't have history with your family. But now they make history with your family, bring the very same person you've been talking to, and repeatedly doing the same thing. Then you go back to the same house, and the cycle repeats. Hence, I've asked in one of the seminars, as to how long do the police take it to say, now we've been sitting, we've been talking with this couple, now we are arresting. How long does it take the police to do that? Then it goes to the courts. One will advise you at the police, go and get a protection order. As a victim, you don't know any difference. You go there, you are being told go to door 4, you go to door 4 and you relate your story. Then you go out there having a peace order. You don't know the difference between protection and peace order. You go back to the police station, you're sitting there, now you see the very same crew coming in, round table discussion again. As to how far and how long. Hence, in my case, I believe that I was failed by the people who were hired to protect me, not the perpetrator itself. Because they were the one, if they have taken me seriously on the first step, during those previous years, I wouldn't have been at this stage where now it was obvious to everybody. He comes now and say, this is your last day, you are dying today, because now I felt now that living but feeling dead is better than dying for real. Do what you feel like doing, I'm living. Society, family, kids or whatever, I don't care anymore. So our justice system, I believe they should not even having a part in saying that we need to try and resolve. Theirs is just arrest, send the matter to court. Because even when it's in court, you're being called by the prosecutor for mediation. For what again? We've been doing this. Why? I hate that thing, mediation. Because for you to now gain the strength and the confidence to stand up and fight, you don't need anyone to now convince you otherwise. Why the need?
Let's hear from the police. Let's just give the police an opportunity here. I don't think we should victimize the people that are here from any profession, but just from their perspective, why does this happen?
The police, their duty is to open a case for you, and then they can go and arrest. So the mediation part, we don't do it at the judge office. Unless that the lady can tell us that police station, then we will know. Because when the police were taken to the college, they were never to take them that if somebody beat somebody, and then you must talk to that person before. No. Or another thing is that when the woman comes to the church office, you will say that it's my husband. Then, do you still love him? Yes. So what do you want us to do? Let's talk to him. That's why I said these cases are different with merits. They're not the same. So I wish that person who will tell us exactly what happened, because police officers, it's not their job to do the mediation. They must open the case for that complainant.
I think at that point, guys, this is right. Do you see the frustration that the police has if you go there and they ask you, what is it that you want us to do? Then the response should be, I want to open a case. I want to open a case, not just talk to him, all right? So it's also, one has to look at these dynamics, but it's not the nature of the police's job to do that. That's not what they're there for. Millicent, I note, but you've also said to me we have to go to tea. Okay, another police, last comment, and then we'll have tea.
Most of us sitting here, knowing that what husbands are doing to us is not right, but we keep on saying, he will be fine, he will change, he will change. I was beaten up, I went to the police station, as a police as I am. When I arrived there, they were like, do it yourself. No one wanted to open a case for me. I sat down there with blood running down, my mouth was like swollen, and after opening up that case, I asked them, who's gonna take me to the hospital? Then everyone was like, whoa, woo, ah. Then I walked to the hospital myself, and the nurses even there wrote on the case history that she brought herself, police refused to bring her, not knowing that I'm also one of the police. And in the morning, I was like, I called the station commander that, hey, I was beaten up, and imagine we are having 2 pistols in the house. Then he say, was that Nura that they would the Sakhan Walk market? Then I see, no, this is now going too far. I called the national office, not even the province. The national office, they gave me the number of some woman abuse, whoever. She spoke to me and said, hey, you know what? Give us the number of that station commander. I give them the number. While I was sitting there with my blue eye, I see them entering the house with the husband, and he was just like, now I'm being arrested. I said, yes, you have to go. Then he went there, and they say you must go and ensure that he's in the cells. I went extra mile to go and look, is he there? Then that night I was working there, and I captured the prisoners. Then I was like, you say you are 9, but now where's the 9th person? Then I said, bring him. Then the others, they went to go and get him. And they said, oh, we are 9 with this police officer. Then everyone was like, calling me names. You, this one, hey, he made his husband to be arrested. Yes, but I was like feeling that, you know what, at least I knew that it was now enough. And my mother-in-law was like, you only got clapped once, you ran to the police station to open a case. And I asked her, how many times was I supposed to be clapped? Because tomorrow morning there was going to be a bullet in my head. And I could have not even been speaking here today.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we are going in any of these provisions, you see an abuse of power. And what has been explained right now in those two are professionals abusing their power and not doing what they were appointed to do. Can we just break for tea 15 minutes, Millicent? We are going to talk a little bit around the Constitution and the legal framework with regard to violence against women. If I can just step back, who of you know what is the very first international human rights instrument? How did it come about that human rights were recognized in the world? Even before that, 1948, okay? 1948, after the Second World War, countries came together and they said, we must have a situation of not repeating the atrocities of the Second World War. There must be a situation that guarantees basic rights of human beings, even if they're in a situation of war. And they started then by drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UDHR. Now, interestingly enough, ladies and gentlemen, South Africa was involved in drafting the UDHR. But instead of adopting it, what did we do? Apartheid. Logic just defies, eh? But that is exactly what has happened. Now, if I had to ask you, define, just on your own, in your notepad, write as one sentence, what does human rights mean to you? What does it mean? Human rights. I'm just going to take a couple of people. Can you share, would you share yours with us?
I've got sorry, I only have a word.
Okay.
Protection.
Okay. Protection. Ma'am, can you share yours?
I think it's the policies that guide us.
The policies that guide us. Can we ask this lady to, what does human rights mean to you?
Being safe.
being safe. Anybody else, ma'am? You want to?
Respect for human dignity.
Respect.
I have a right to information.
Okay.
Human rights are freedoms that all people are entitled to by virtue of being human beings.
Yes, thank you. In Chapter 2 of that Constitution, you will find the document that contains the human rights that people in South Africa have. You see there? Look at from section 7. That chapter 2 is called Our Bill of Rights. Now, with the history of apartheid, in some countries you will get a Bill of Rights in normal legislation. But normal legislation, Parliament can change with a simple majority. Okay? For us, it was so important that we could never again have the situation where people's human rights are infringed upon, that we said it has to be in our Constitution. Now, what I want to look to you, can you just read who gets these rights? Read section 7 there. Who's entitled to, let me just see if I've got the right. Yeah, look at section 7. Tell me, who are entitled to these rights in South Africa? All people in our country. Do you see that? It doesn't say all South African citizens. It says all people in our country. Now, ladies and gentlemen, human rights have certain basic characteristics, if I can call it that. What did I do with this? First of all, human rights are universal. So the whole idea of human rights is it should apply everywhere in the world. We know there are countries that do not acknowledge it yet, if you look at China, but the idea internationally with the United Nations is it must be universal. That across the world, there must be certain rights that people are granted. Okay? The other thing is human rights are inalienable. You can't sell it. You can't transfer it. Okay? It's yours. You can't give it up for some or the other reason. Now, if you look at it where this is very contentious, when we talk about corporal punishment, okay, you know there's this debate around outlawing corporal punishment in the homes, okay? It has been outlawed in schools since the adoption of the South African Schools Act. An educator may not inflict corporal punishment. As a matter of fact, corporal punishment is common assault. Okay? We then, in the beginning after that act, when we worked in schools, we found that parents would go to the school and say, but I give you permission, hit him. No. That human right is not the parents to give up. It's nobody's right to give up. So it's inalienable, all right? But then human rights also don't, sorry, this thing. Human rights are interdependent. You can't have one right being more important than another right. And the one right cannot exist in isolation from the other rights. You hear very often when you talk about children and their right to education, you would often hear people say, how can a child exercise their right to basic education if they have not eaten for the last 2 days? So it's the right to basic education is closely connected to the right to food. Okay? They are interchangeable, they're interdependent, they depend on each other. Now, but my human right cannot be more important than your human right. Okay? If I say, if the human rights, the Bill of Rights says, I have the right to swing my fist, right? Let's say that's a right. Then the right to swing my fist stops where this woman's face begins, because she has a right to have a beautiful face. My right isn't more important than hers. It doesn't allow that. Now, it is sometimes true that you get situations where human rights conflict, okay? And then you get into contentious debates, for example, bodily integrity, my right to decide whether I want to have a child or not, and abortion, okay? There are more than one right in that particular issue. And at some point then, the legislature has to decide, okay, in this scenario, which one will supersede? Okay, but I'll talk about abortion a little bit later. Now, when we look at the human rights, okay, that we have in South Africa, there are 3 different types, okay? 3 different types. The first one, and this is worldwide, the first type of rights are the rights that you have as a citizen. Sorry, this thing's bad. Millicent, I had markers in the box. Can I get them, please? The first category of rights that is in our Constitution is civil and political rights. Those are the rights that we are granted to participate in civil society and political life. These are the rights that countries agree to grant to citizens or people or human beings the easiest, because it doesn't cost anything. Right to equality, freedom of association, okay? Right to dignity. You see that? Right to freedom of belief in religion. Do you see that? But the government granting that freedom of association, it doesn't require them to put infrastructure. It doesn't require infrastructure. So if you look at our Constitution, you're going to see the majority of the rights in our Constitution are these rights, okay? The second type of rights, and this is, you will very often hear that people say South Africa is one of the best constitutions in the world, okay? I'll give you one of the reasons why I think it is so. The second category of rights that you have is socio-economic rights. Socio-economic rights. Now, socio-economic rights, we have a couple. Education, right to basic education. The right of access to health care. The right of access to food. The right of access to housing. The right of access to social assistance, SASSA. Do you see just the language of freedom of association as opposed to the right to access to housing? How is that different? that word access. It costs money to build a house. The government must provide taxes in order to build those houses. So when you're looking at socio-economic rights, okay, socio-economic rights are second-generation rights. Those are the rights that governments undertake to grant, but you can't guarantee that it will be perfect, if I can say that. Governments that undertake these obligations to grant those rights must provide progressive realization of those human rights. Let me give you an example. There was a court case, I don't know if Steve spoke about it yesterday, Subramoni versus the Minister of Health. Now, Mr. Subramoni suffered from a kidney disease. He needed a dialysis machine. Okay? At the time of the court case, Mr. Subramoni took the KZN Department of Health to court, to the Constitutional Court, right? Because the Department of Health had denied Subramoni access to the dialysis machine. And Subramoni was saying, but you not giving me, I have to be on that machine. And by you not allowing me to be on that machine, you are infringing my right to emergency medical care. We have two rights in our Constitution. Right not to be refused emergency medical care, and then we have a right of access to health care. All right? So Subramoni was, now emergency medical care applies to everyone, even a private hospital. So if it's an emergency, what is an emergency? And the court here had to look at what is an emergency. It says it's something that is life-threatening, that requires an intervention that will save the person's life. In other words, you do something in order to save the life. This is a situation where private hospitals will do something, stabilize you, and transfer you to the public hospital. But they have to do something. They have to provide that intervention that caused the emergency. So the question was whether Subramoni had an emergency. The medical evidence was clear. If Subramoni doesn't go on the dialysis, he will die. Okay? When the court looked at what is an emergency, they said Subramoni was not relying on the correct human right. Because what Subramoni had was a chronic disease. Even if you put him on the dialysis machine once, you won't save his life. He has to be on it all the time. Okay? And Subramoni lost the case. And he died. Now, people might be very sad. And in law, we say we mustn't allow hard cases to make bad law. And this is a hard one because the reality is Subramoni is dead. But let me tell you the dynamics of a socio-economic right. Because what was the Department of Health's defense? Aiko imali. Sorry, that's where I come from, we would say that. Aiko. We don't have money. We don't have enough money. That was their defense. So we can't be forced to put a person on the machine if we don't have sufficient resources. And did this issue of resources with the role players not come up yesterday? No, you didn't talk about the price of the sexual assault kits and how expensive they are and that you can't waste it. And police don't having petrol. NPA overworked and understaffed. You see? That's what we're talking about. The harsh reality is, it is a defense in a claim against a breach of a socio-economic right to say that we lack the resources. Because the governments responsibility is to gradually improve access to those rights. It's not going to be perfect. We didn't wake up on the 28th of April and everybody had a house. We are 25 years down the line and still people are living in informal settlements because of access to housing. But the harsh reality, and I always keep this for last, was the hospital didn't refuse Subramani access to the dialysis machine right from the beginning. When Subramani went there, they gave him access to the dialysis machine. Now, for a dialysis machine, you have to make an appointment. All right? Subramani started missing appointments. So then stood a machine with no patient and other patients needing that machine. But because it's on an appointment system, it's not a queuing system, it stood there unused because Subramani didn't pitch up for the appointments. The reality for the Department of Health is, what did they have to do? They prioritize. They prioritize. Now, let's rather give it to people that stick to their appointments. And then when he became too ill and he really needed it permanently, they said, sorry, because we prioritize. That's the harsh reality. How many people are healthcare workers here? How many of you have, well, I don't know if you're in public hospitals, but intensive care, if you don't have beds and you have more than one patient, how do you decide who gets the one bed in intensive care? Can I point or just from an experience, because I want to show you the harsh realities that one is dealing with here. Ma'am, can I pick on you?
He got a chance to be healthy again, or if it's terminal illness.
Thank you.
We assess. The assessment then will give us the priority. We do triage and see who's actually most to live and who's actually we don't actually. We're not God to decide, but we give priority in terms of to say, who can we actually transfer to the other place, and maybe this one we need to actually urgently look at it because of the chances that yes, he's gonna survive.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the harsh reality of public health and access to healthcare. There isn't enough resources, so they make a judgment call. If we come back to the realities of socioeconomic rights, do you see how difficult it can become? Especially if you're in control of that little bit of resources that we have, and then in the end, you decide how those resources are utilized. And I think, there's a big argument to be made for you can't enjoy your civil and political rights if you don't have these. But South Africa chose to put it in our constitution. Our socioeconomic rights are in the constitution. So we are guaranteeing those basic rights. The third category of right, of which we only have one in our constitution, is environmental and developmental rights. If you look in the constitution, you're going to see a right of access to clean water and an environment free from pollution. Those are your so-called green rights, your third generation rights that recognize that we have the right to live in an environment that will not endanger us. Okay? So, worldwide, human rights are categorized in those three rights: civil and political rights, socioeconomic rights, and environmental and developmental rights. Constitution. Because FHR, I was in a previous workshop, I think the last one we were in was Cape Town in the beginning of the year, where they shared findings of human rights research project. And it was alarming to find out that there are still so many people in South Africa that don't know their rights, that have not seen a copy of the Constitution. And how can you enforce something if you don't know about it? Can I ask you, you can work in pairs, two together, sorry, because the room is so full, I can't do more than that. Look at those rights. Can you just look there and tell me, make a list, which of those rights are affected? When we're talking about violence against women and children, which of those rights in our Bill of Rights are affected? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, work through them to make sure. And remember, if you say which one, I'm going to ask you why. I want you to look at the rights in our Bill of Rights, Chapter 2. And tell me which ones are affected when we have violence against women and children. Which of those? Identify the ones that are involved. Research has shown violence always escalates. And if there's no intervention, it's going to land up in femicide, in the worst case scenario, when a person's life is taken away. Okay? Human dignity, what is that? I think that is at the core of rights. It's your right to be treated like a worthy human being. And if you look at domestic violence, at the core of domestic violence is to erode the person's dignity, to take away their self-esteem, to make them doubt that they are that worthy human being. Okay. Anybody else? We've got life and dignity. Don't repeat what we've already got. Yes, at the back there, thanks.
I have freedom and security of a person, subsection C, to be free from all forms of violence in the country of violence.
Yes, to be free from all forms of violence. Freedom and security of the person, that's the one that talks about your right to decide whether you want to reproduce, your right to decide whether you want to participate in experiments, and also your right to be free from all forms of violence. Correct. Can we have another one?
With our cultures, a woman is forced to leave their churches or their belief to follow their husband.
Yeah, there is this societal pressure that you can't agree to believe differently. But there's also other things around freedom of religion and belief. Unfortunately, too much in the press currently in South Africa, if you look at all these pastors that are having all these wealthy churches in South Africa. Look at Omatoso. He's in jail there where I come from, Port Elizabeth. And how he has abused his power as a religious leader just to commit crime. It's sick. And then also, remember when we spoke about the somebody mentioned it earlier, if you maybe go to the minister and the church and you know the whole thing about you must stay married and until death do you part, those religious pressures on women, specifically in domestic violence situations. Yes, ma'am, do you have one? Oh, there's one, thank you.
Insecurity of a person. Section 2B, security and control over their body. especially when looking at the abuse of women in terms of rape, and the men thinking that they have the right over their body because they've paid lobola.
Control over a person's body. Do you know that it is possible for a married woman to be raped by her own husband? And that's what it is. Even in a marriage or in a relationship, no means no. And that sense of entitlement. People are not property. It's not objects that you own. People are people. Okay, next one. Yes, ma'am.
You can't say whatever you want to say. You need to always be respectful. And if you have an opinion, it's seen as being disrespectful. And then it's a whole situation of speak when spoken to, and also speak about what I want you to speak about. So if you don't agree with me, then you just keep quiet.
Yeah, yeah. And also, you must remember, expression is much broader. Eh? Expression has to do with the way I choose to dress. And we spoke about it. Very often people will say, what did she do to provoke this? What did she wear? Or you hear people saying, when they get to the charge officer saying, were you wearing that when it happened? What does that mean? You know? That's because freedom of expression allows you to express yourself. Okay? And association, if you look at the domestic violence situation, remember, he doesn't come and beat you right from the first time. There's a whole grooming process and an alienation from your friends and your family, where your right to associate is taken away from you, gradually. All right, can we have another one? Yes, sir.
28, every child has the right to, subsection D says, to be protected from maltreatment, neglect, abuse, or degradation.
Correct. We talk about domestic violence, but that's not the only thing that is wrong in society. We have children that are being treated really horribly by the same people that are supposed to love them. Yeah. Did I see your hand, man?
Yeah. Chair, you're not in a space to be accessing your full right to access to education, so that also impacts.
Correct. If right to basic education, if it's a situation of teachers, and we have that. We have teachers impregnating learners in schools. Now, how does that not impact on that child's right to basic education? And also the child's right not to be subject to abuse. The lady here, you're just going to have to speak up, Mama.
So this is on labor relations, number 23. Everyone has the right to fair labor practices. So if you think about the jobs that women dominate, in most cases it's normally in the service sector. That includes domestic workers, cleaners, and often the rights of women in those industries is often overlooked, opening them up to different forms of violation and violence. You know, I mean, even with domestic workers, many a times we've heard of severe cases where domestic workers are killed at work or violated or raped. I mean, if we also need to take it a step further, when we speak about the very controversial but very important decriminalizing of sex workers, right? What does it mean for us to decriminalize sex work? It means that we are opening up for labor practices and laws that will protect women, which number one will reduce the rates of transmission in terms of HIV and STIs. We're also saying that we need the protection of these workers because they're providing a service. So we've seen in most cases, industries that are dominated by women, there is also a high prevalence of forms of violence, whether it be physical, domestic, or sexual.
Yeah, and also I think coming onto that, sexual harassment. All these things that we are hearing of jobs for sexual favors. So definitely has an impact on fair labor practices. Yes, ma'am.
It's easy for us to have this fabulous constitution, but I often think realizing that You know, and I think it's that lack of activism sometimes and accountability on office bearers. For example, I was just thinking about the machine, the dialysis machine. Why should it be prioritized when politicians have bodyguards, they drive expensive cars? Why can't we prioritize well-being and take away those cars from politicians? When they travel abroad, you know, European politicians walk or ride bicycles. Ours drive big cars. You know, I mean, how as citizens do we realize those rights? Practically, for me, is the crux of the matter.
We must just remember that if we decide that that is a public holiday and stay-at-home day and don't go and vote, then you've lost your power. You've lost your power to complain because you chose not to exercise your democratic right. We point fingers, we say these things, but you know what? When in '94, when the new dispensation happened, government usurped a very strong civil society into government. And in a sense, we've come to the stage where civil society needs to become active and proactive again. Because we thought, no, everything is perfect now. We got what we wanted for, what we worked for. But then sacrificed a very active civil society. And you and me as citizens have to realize our responsibility towards this as well. If I have these rights, how will I enforce them? Where do I go to for help? It's very, very important. Input into legislation, drafting, giving comments on legislation, for example, the legalization of sex work. All of those kind of things are where we come in and take part in the law-making processes of this country. Because who makes laws? The legislature in Parliament. No? National Assembly votes on it, then it goes to the provinces. But before it gets there is a public process whereby we can comment. But the majority of us choose never to comment on the laws or the practices. When the budget votes, or when the budget speeches are made, do we ever question the security that is allocated? I personally feel all our politicians must be made to go to public hospitals. I'm going to tell you, we're going to have grand public hospitals.
I see the most important one for me as Section 27, because it cuts across so many issues. It's healthcare, it's food, it's water, social security. I mean, for instance, so many women will spend the whole day just taking their kids to a public hospital. And sometimes when you're about to reach the line, they said, oh, we only need 20, and then you're going to come back tomorrow. And then when you do that, what is happening to you as an individual? Where is your career? How do you promote yourself? At that point, a man is somewhere working, and then when they bring that piece of paper, which is money, they feel that they've got control over you because you are not doing anything. The other thing which I was looking at the other day was water. You know, for me and you, I'm sure most of you are from urban areas, affluent places. Very few people are from rural areas where water is the most scarce resource. People will go out at 3 o'clock to line up their buckets so that at least they will have enough water. And this very water, who controls it? Who are these people in these boards where they can say, at least in this board of directors, we have women who are going to make those important decisions to say we put more budget on the water forward for rural women. These are things, and food. How do we cook our food? We need energy. Rural women are still going to the mountain and getting the what? They carry the wood. What time? and then to put the blame on them, and then after that they go out there and still work the land and so forth. So these things, I think, really, we need, Sarah, to get maybe one session where we talk about the Bill of Rights in its entirety. Because when I looked at all of them here, there were about 17, which are all important, which all of them affect women. And most of these women are not women like you and me who are educated. Yeah. There are those people in the squatter camps. There are those people in the farms. You know, let me stop here.
There's this, you often hear people say, accused people have more rights than victims. Have any of you said that? Tell me where in that Bill of Rights, where in that, why do you say accused people have more rights than the victims? You hear, especially NGOs and civil society advocating it, why is this statement being made? Why is that perception there? Look in the rights. Look at that, you must know those rights. You can't enforce them if you don't know them.
And in times when you're doing advocacy work, I think it's a matter of how you word, the word itself, to say the rights. But I think at times you just feel that the justice system, or, when people are arrested and they've committed a crime, they are sort of like protected. That's how people feel, because we represent the community. Hence you find that when that person is given bail, like there's a policeman who killed someone and was given 1,000 rand bail. And of course when it came out, the community was very angry, So it's those things where there isn't much engagement with the community to understand, like you said, rightly so, the research that Foundation for Human Rights did in terms of people understanding or have had a copy of the Constitution. So there is more to be done for people to understand what is in the Bill of Rights and what does it entail.
Yeah. Can I ask you, look for the section Rights of Accused and Detained Persons. Do you see it? Now, I want to tell you, that one has, and it's a worldwide, it's not specific to us. It's all over the world, that you have the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. Okay? So at the time of the arrest, you're not guilty yet. If the community is up in arms about an accused being given bail, can I ask the people from the community here, how many of you have given evidence to the prosecutor to support the denying of bail? The prosecutor, ladies and gentlemen, is the attorney for the state and the attorney for the victim. That is the advocate. The prosecutor there is that. Legal aid and a lawyer, if you can afford one, is there for the victim. There are certain basic rights that are guaranteed. It's not for me and you to decide it happened. When the court says there's enough evidence to show that it happened, that's when it happens in law. Now, the prosecutor is not supposed to do the investigations. They must prosecute the case. The police must investigate the crime. Now, if you look at the Constitution, it says an accused person has a right to bail. If you don't assist your prosecutors with evidence as to why the accused should not be released on bail, then how can your prosecutor oppose bail? That is something that's very, very important. Yes, ma'am.
I think
You are raising very important issues, but those are for learned people. I'm just saying, maybe I'm putting it wrong, but if you look at, for example, in Alexandra, right, where because at least now few years back, they started with this mediation thing to try and assist people to understand what's going on. But then generally you find that Pretty from Alexandra in the shack, I don't understand what you're talking about. I don't even know. So obviously my decision and what I'll do is different from, you understand? So there is a need for those who have information to share with the ordinary citizen in the communities. Hence, if you look at Bakause, they always take the law into their hands. Why? Because they don't have the understanding of the Constitution or how the law works. All people know is that NPA here, prosecutor, gets bribed by a Somali shop owner when they've killed someone. The police corruption in terms of whether you have money. So there's no trust already. And lack of knowledge, there's no trust there's no good relationship between the police and the justice system. So can you imagine the mess?
No, I don't. I know, I work with it on a daily basis. But there's a lot of civil society sitting here. Civil society knows better. So if civil society is providing services in those same communities and they've had the benefit of having the human rights education, civil society must pass it on. Just like every one of us has that obligation. I know two people there at the back, the lady there and then that lady. Right in the corner there. Yes, ma'am.
They will tell you that the first and the last time I had an interaction with the investigator was when I went to lay the charge, which means there is no one who guides the victim through the process. And yet, the perpetrator has got this huge support. And that's where we are angry. And I'm one of those who are angry on behalf of all the people that I speak to who feel like that.
I think what the lady is saying is very, very important. It is because the system automatically assists the accused. And there isn't that, although the prosecutor and the police are actually there to assist the victim, but that perception is not, and it's what you're saying is absolutely right, ma'am. Yes, right at the back, and then we'll come to this lady.
The Bill of Rights also says that your right cannot be at the account of somebody else. You can't infringe on somebody else's rights. So if we look at the Criminal Procedures Act under Section 153.3 and 154.2b, the rights of an accused in terms of sexual offenses, they cannot be named until they stand trial. Now, in terms of protecting the accused and why we as civil society have a problem is because, especially when it comes to acts of sexual offenses against children, when these offenders or these perpetrators are out on bail, they are allowed to go back into society in their capacities that they were in before. And so, for me personally, I see those sections as being unconstitutional because they're not in line with the Bill of Rights. Because your right as an accused cannot infringe on my right as the victim. Thank you.
You see, the thing with human rights is it's a balancing act that has to happen. I hear what you are saying. Those are procedural rights to safeguard the accused. Because you must know that for how many prosecutors? Do we have prosecutors here? Yeah. Prosecutors will tell you that when they do a case, procedurally it must be right, as well as substantially it must be right. And they have to work within that particular framework. So can you imagine the outcry that a rapist walks free because it was allowed as his identity would be revealed? Do you understand what I'm saying? So there are reasons for certain, at this stage, and I understand where you're coming from. At this stage, he's not convicted yet. Can I ask from the NPA, give the civil society recommendations of how they can assist you when it comes to opposing bail? Can we ask some practical, ma'am, I'll come back to you, practical advice?
Evidence as to how it affected the people on the ground is very important. And most of the time when the docket get to us in the court, when we have to oppose the bail, we have maybe 1 or 2 statements because the investigations are not completed yet. So in many cases, whilst the district prosecutor deals with the matter in bail, the community support is very, very important. And that also makes the magistrate that deals with the bail application can see that the community has an interest in this bail application and that the community is in protest of this man getting bail. Because that's also one of the factors that the magistrate takes into consideration when it deals with bail, is the community's interest in this case, and what does the community feel about this man getting bail. So being there, being supportive, and people with insight into how this crime happened, also to come consult with the prosecutor and give insight of how this happened, if those statements have not been obtained yet.
But I think very important as civil society then is you have to put evidence to the fact that the person, that there's bail conditions, that you cannot be allowed to, because until he's convicted, he won't be on that list, okay? And we all know the criticism around the sexual offenders list and everything is, at that stage, you need to show that he was working with children and that even if he's allowed to bail, that he cannot have access or contact with children. That doesn't go against that Criminal Procedure Act, but at the time of opposing bail, it is important because that's why you would have with that situation. And remember now, it's until first appearance, okay, that you don't mention his name. But when he's out on bail, remember, even if you go on bail, there could be conditions upon which the person could go on bail. If that man was put on bail, there were no restrictions, so he just went back to his ordinary life. And that is a travesty of justice because he probably went on to abuse further children.
I just want to, if NPA can assist further in terms of an ordinary community member, what are the steps? It's not enough to say you can come and share. You know, obviously people go and protest, they must not give in bail. But what are the practical steps of an ordinary community member that can use to reach to the prosecutor and give that evidence? Because we don't know that.
Are you prosecutors?
Yes.
I'm putting him on the spot here. We have to hear, because remember, if we don't do teamwork here, we're going to fail victims. Sir?
Normally we have statements in the docket on which we rely, and with interaction with the investigating officer who gives us the information so that we can put it before the court, for the court to make a just decision as to whether to admit the person on bail or not.
Okay.
Sorry, the NPA did not answer the question. That one is obvious, the one that you've just mentioned. But my sister, they raised something important. Okay. But we want to know the steps on how, as an ordinary Alexandra community member, I can come to you and give you more evidence so that that person cannot be given bail in terms of 1, 2, 3 risks that you don't have.
I think the first thing is the statements that you have to give to the investigating officers. So as members of the community, you can submit statements to the investigating officer that will contain facts that can be taken into account to oppose bail. But we'll hear from the person.
You can come talk to the prosecutor and highlight the concerns you have. And I also once had a case coming from Randfontein where the community has signed a petition Okay. And that petition was also handed to the prosecutor and was later handed up as an exhibit in the bail application. And that also counted a lot in favor of not granting bail.
Not granting bail. Oh, so there's a petition at least. Okay, they just hand it to that lady there.
I think just to add on to that, what this lady was saying, if this constitution can be done in a manner or in the sense that every person can relate to it. I'm thinking about I'm in the space of youth development. At school, if the school knew the power of this, how it can meet them at their level and understanding, because here, as much as we're speaking, we're too high level. So they cannot relate, they don't even know that if the teacher was on bail, they could have rallied because he's probably been perpetrating at other children, at other schools and whatever, but then they don't know that they've got the power. So, and it would start even at, what do you call nurseries, for early child, where this can be done in simple layman terms, whether it's through cartoons, Gogo, whoever from
there are many of those around.
But they're not in townships. They're not there. And it doesn't get spread. I'm very passionate about youth development and NGOs and doing workshops. But this even for me to just read it. But how do I relate it to a guy, these boys who are smoking Yaupen, whatever, and saying and give them power with this? They won't relate. So how do we then, in different organizations, whether it's an NPO, an NGO, whatever, in my community, to say this is a constitution, but it's been revised or reworded so that people can relate with it. People are not educated. People are not having, don't have grade 1, can't read, can't write.
I think she mentioned something important. In the just after 1994, we were part of lobbying groups to get human rights into the school curriculum. But one of the big things there were, how do we make sure, because there wasn't educational material. Remember, there was no human rights in South Africa. I remember when I did my master's in human rights, there wasn't human rights in South Africa. I had to study international human rights because we didn't have it. And what I have to say, when we rolled it out, it is in the curriculum that there's constitutional education in the social sciences curriculum and also human rights education in your life orientation. So and I think this is where we failed. What happened then is they said, okay, come, human rights experts, teach our teachers to teach human rights. They had a cascading model. They sent people from the district, we trained, we provided materials, we simplified, we wrote textbooks. That stuff never got from the districts to the schools. So the cascading model, it's like an idea of I train you and you go out and you train other people. So that model, although we trained countrywide, had its flaws. And I'll be the first to admit that it isn't perfect, because why 25 years down the line do we now have young people coming out of school and not knowing their basic rights? I can still understand people that were adults at that particular stage. But why is it that they teach you all kinds of things, but the law is going to affect you no matter who you are? Why not stop and just make sure that you know how to exercise and enforce those basic rights? So that is a major criticism, one which I cannot even propose to solve. Yes, ma'am.
Now the Foundation for Human Rights is going to pilot an animation series. We've already gone into production and so forth. And we'd like inputs from everyone, I suppose, when we start launching it, because we've piloted in schools basically currently, but no process is perfect. It's one organization that's doing this currently, and any other ideas of how to make it more popular, beyond even school, because I think the focus is on school, but what about the elderly who have been found to not know much about the Constitution as well? So other ways to make it more accessible. Yes.
Thank you. If we can just come back to this discussion, when you're looking at this, you will see there are many rights that are impacted on when there are incidences of crimes against women and children. And that brings me to the point that if you take this Constitution of ours, ladies and gentlemen, you have the most important law in this country. Oh, sorry. Why do I say that? It is what we call supreme. Now, that means literally, if I put this on my head, this is the Constitution. Nothing, no law, no behavior can be approved that goes against this Constitution. So if Parliament makes a law, or like the lady mentioned, the Criminal Procedure Act, which she feels is unconstitutional, remember the Constitution is right at the top. Everything that's below that must be in line with the Constitution. Below the Constitution comes your national laws. All right? So when you have it here, here you have your national laws. So for example, your Criminal Procedure Act, your Sexual Offences Act, your Domestic Violence Act, those are pieces of laws that were made by Parliament. Okay? Now, any law that Parliament makes, when I say Parliament, I'm talking about the Jujus, National Assembly. Okay? Did you? Yeah, there's this video clip going around about the speaker. You see the anarchist one? It's hilarious. You must go and look there. But in any event, when laws are approved at the national, but when it comes there, before it comes there, there's a committee that will revise, is it in line with the Constitution or not? It is still possible that if it creeps through, that you can contest the constitutionality of any piece of legislation if you make a case to say it goes against the Constitution. It's like the legalization of prostitution. You have to base it on the Bill of Rights to say, where does it infringe? My right to freedom of choice of a profession, fair trade, all of those kind of things. Now, national laws must be in line with the Constitution. But we have 9 provinces, and every province also has the right to make laws. So, at a provincial level, when the province makes the laws, the province must make sure they don't break national laws and they don't contravene the Constitution. So, provincial law is subject to national law and subject to the Constitution. You go further down, you have municipalities, okay? All of them, they make laws as well, bylaws, the city's bylaws. Now, when a municipality makes a law, they have to check what does the law of the province say, what does the national law say, and make sure it's not against the Constitution. So that little book is the most important thing because it guarantees the protection of our human rights. But now, when we look at these controversial issues, it is possible that rights can be in conflict. Okay? Let's just talk a little bit about, because sometimes it's very difficult. Let's use the Termination of Pregnancy Act, the Choice of Termination of Pregnancy Act. The Choice of Termination of Pregnancy Act defines a woman as a woman of any age. Mummies, your daughter of 14 is a woman of any age. Okay? Choice of Termination of Pregnancy Act says if she's a minor, she doesn't have a need to get her parents' consent to get the abortion. She must give informed consent. Don't hate, I'm just telling you what the law says. Ne? Don't hate the messenger. I'm just telling you what the law says. Now, the Choice of Termination of Pregnancy Act went right up to the Constitutional Court, which is the highest court in the country. Okay? Because you had religious organizations that were saying abortion is wrong. But if I had to make you vote today, let's just see. And you ignore what the law says. Vote with your belief, because you have a right to a belief. Those that by choice. Choice of the pregnant. Abortion by choice of the pregnant girl must be allowed. Okay, let's just see. Those of you that say abortion is wrong, it shouldn't be allowed, put up your hands. It's complicated. Now, if we had space, what we would have done is I would have gotten you to go stand that side of the room and that side, because there's a lot of people here that didn't put up their hands. Why not? Wait, yes, we'll hear this.
I'm conflicted. Why? Because the Constitution says everyone has a right to life, and I believe that child has a right to live. And then also the girl, may I say, freedom of expression. Hallelujah. Yes. So in this case, I think for me as a person, I'm a bit conflicted on which side, because if everyone has a right to live, including that unborn child, and at the same time, I have to support to say, as a 14-year-old, there is a reason why you should have an abortion. I'm not sure which side to take.
And it's all right to be conflicted. Not all laws are always fair. Those were discriminatory in its nature. So, but she brought out that one right, the right to life. Ne? So that's your one right on the one side. Yes, ma'am.
That I agree, we have a right to life, but when you do an abortion, you're not killing the child, you're killing the fetus. You're not even killing it. Sorry, yeah, please do excuse me. You're terminating. You're even killing, you're terminating a fetus on a child. And you have a right to do that.
All right, wait. We'll allow some debate around this. There. Ladies and gentlemen, just give us a chance.
Even the law of the Bible, they say, don't kill, don't steal. So if you are aborting, it means you are killing someone. So from my side, to abort is killing. Because in the law of the Bible, they say, you must not steal, you must not steal, kill. So if you abort, you kill someone. There is more for me.
I've noted 3 already. I've noted life, I've noted religion and belief, I've noted bodily integrity, the right to reproduction.
Firstly, for instance, a woman is being raped and she falls pregnant. You expect that person to raise that child. Secondly, how our constitution, I think sometimes is confusing itself. How do they determine a child? And they say when it comes to abortion, any woman has the right to abort, and even a minor can sign a consent form, consent to termination. So it's confusing, because what is the minor, what is the child, and who must give consent and all that. So
okay, I'm going to just until we get to the next speaker. The Choice of Termination of Pregnancy Act defines a woman as a woman of any age. Okay, your healthcare practitioners that sit here if any of them have worked in public hospitals where abortions are performed, will tell you that there is a process of counseling, in terms of which in law, they have to obtain the informed consent of the girl, okay? So once they have the informed consent of the girl, they can advise and say, it's better for your parents to be here to support you. But if it's that girl of the pastor that says, my dad will kill me, I don't want them to know. And she understands what is she doing, she understands the possible consequences, then our law as it stands now allows the healthcare practitioner to proceed with the abortion. So that is what the law currently says. Okay, there was a hand.
I understand when they say adults can actually abort, but my worry, because I work with kids, even adults, I've realized people who have aborted, they do have psychological effect. And that's a long term, and most of them, they're not even functional. So imagine a 14-year-old, really, life spell, how is she going to grow, some of them? It's a taboo.
We are fighting for children who, for whatever reason, cannot handle having children. But we do not fight for children. For the past 20 years or 30 years, we have had an epidemic, HIV. Children were had in households. We are not fighting for their rights not to be adults, but we think that we should step in when these children don't want to be mothers. Yeah. You know, I mean, really, let's think about it. Let's be rational here. A child-headed household has become a thing. We even write papers about it in academia. But we don't think of the consequences of those children running households, looking after other children, the neighbor coming in and raping their child. And then we're here making moral judgments. I mean, it's absurd. This is a society that hates women, and it's a society that does not love itself enough to love our children, you know?
We never used to have so many children. We never used to commit abortions. Why? Because of the morals. The government should be saying to households or civil society, focus on morality. Because when there's morals, most of the ills will not be happening. Because today, people are allowed to abort, but they're aborting, but they're having so many children. And another thing that exacerbates the situation is the grant system, because people are running to make four children and then to get the grant money so they can go do their hair and pay the accounts. They don't use their money to their kids.
The one thing, before I allow the speaker, we are entering a very alive debate in law. And the thing is about the relationship between law and morality. Now, when a lawmaker like our part makes laws, they make laws about what is the general morality of people. The difficult thing is, whose morals do you enforce? And to make moral judgments around this is very, very difficult. If everybody in society has a particular moral belief, everybody, then the law can intervene and make a legal rule. It's easy. But these type of things, worldwide, there is always different camps. And you cannot convert a pro-lifer to a pro-abortion. Don't even try. But they have the right to freedom of an opinion. And then at least I think one also has the obligation, because, you know, we've been talking about rights this whole morning. But the one thing I haven't mentioned is that we have responsibilities. Yes. With every right comes maybe more than one responsibility. It's not legislated. But sometimes we don't focus on the fact that I have certain responsibilities when it comes to the enforcement of rights, but I have a very keen speaker there. I'm going to allow 3 or 4 more, and then we're going. I'm coming to you.
Advocate Lindy, I think majority of what I wanted to say, you've captured me. So,
oh, sorry.
No, it's fine. I'm just elaborating on that. So I want to say when we talk about morality in terms of termination of pregnancies, where was the morality when somebody was raped and led to a pregnancy? My main point here is also, yes, the Bill of Rights does say that you have the right to life, but the Bill of Rights your right to life cannot infringe on somebody else's. So the fact that I might be a pro-lifer and somebody else might not be, doesn't mean that that person doesn't have that right opinion that they can do with their body as they choose. And I can do with my body as I choose, and I can keep that pregnancy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, correct. Thank you. Very well said. Okay, let's go here. 2 more, yeah. Okay.
I'm saying that we need to establish the root cause of early pregnancies first, and second, we need to make sure that we teach, like the Department of Education establishes sex education from an early age, in order that we may not have this kind of debate. Yes.
First of all, abortion or termination of pregnancy is a medical procedure, like any other medical procedure, that has to be, if you don't like abortion, fine, don't have one. However, do not stop anyone else to make that choice. We make the choice to terminate pregnancies for different reasons. Right now, like my brother just said here, why are people having unintended pregnancies? There's a lack of contraceptions, right? There's a lack of sexual education. Right now, a policy has been sitting in the Department of Education's desk for almost 2 years about introducing condoms and SRH services into schools. But the same people who call abortion morally wrong or corrupt are the same people who refuse for children to be taught proper sex education in schools. So if you're saying you're pro-life, which actually I call anti-abortion, because if you're pro-life, why do you not think about my life as a woman? And how my life is going to be affected if I have a child I cannot afford, if I have a child from rape, if I have a child and have to drop out, or if I have a child that I do not want or I never intended to be a mother. What about my life? So firstly, and the moral issue around even the psychology issues that were raised, there are tons of research and studies that have been done to show that there is no causal link between abortion and psychological distress. I've been reporting and researching abortion for many years. I say this with my experience, saying there is no psychological link. This is not to say that a woman who gets an abortion cannot feel regret, loss, or any kinds of feelings. But those feelings, studies have shown that usually the women who feel these feelings are from backgrounds of abusive relationships. So also when we're talking about abortion and the right to access of abortion, and we're talking about gender-based violence right this moment, do you know that there are many studies that show that a lot of women who seek abortions are married women in abusive relationships? So if we're sitting in this room saying we are activists, we are people fighting gender-based violence, what are we saying when we say we also don't believe in abortion, right? There are correlations between all these issues. A lot of the times the women who actually suffer from emotional distress after an abortion are married women who their partners then abuse them because of the abortion. There is something called reproductive coercion, where married abusive men force their wives to fall pregnant as a way to entrap them in those marriages and relationships. This is why we need abortion. You don't like abortion, don't get one. But we cannot systematically change the law to suit our moral, religious, or whatever needs when we're living in a country with the rates of femicide, gender-based violence, abuse in general that we have, and when we're living in a country where parents picket
shout and even threaten to withdraw their children out of schools because they don't want their children to be taught about sex, where parents refuse for their children who are sexually active already, to refuse to go on contraceptives because of abantu bazotini. Two months ago, a 19-year-old student called me asking for help about where to get an abortion in the Val, only to find out that when she went to her local clinic that does offer abortion, they told her she must bring her mother. She's 19. Yes, she's an adult. What doctors and nurses are doing to prevent abortion to happen. In Rustenburg, there's been cases where nurses have locked the doors to the abortion procedural room. So and obviously we know in the law as well, we have what we call conscientious objection. If you are a health worker and you do not want to perform abortions, you for moral, religious reasons, you can excuse yourself. But the question I have, if we have those health workers in this room, the question I have for you is, if a man who has just been shot, who has just shot and killed someone, walks in with wounds, are you going to treat them?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm closing the debate on this one. I want to tell you how the Constitutional Court dealt with the claim that abortion infringed. When the societies or the organizations took the Choice of Termination of Pregnancy Act to the Constitutional Court, there was the argument that it infringes on the right to life. We've heard it here of the unborn fetus. Okay? Those arguments were there. There's also passionate arguments that are made on religious grounds. Thou shalt not kill and all of that. But what we look at the right to bodily integrity. The right to bodily integrity includes the right to make decisions about whether you want to reproduce or not. So, at that point, the court had to decide. The court. And you see, this is what lawyers have to do. We have to separate ourselves from morals and everything. We work with the law. The court had to decide, when does life start? Okay? When does life start according to the law? And in that, the court said, life starts once a child is born and able to live independently from the mother's umbilical cord. Before that, there is no right to life. So, despite that, but I need to tell you something, because, you see, there's a reason why this workshop is actually 3 days long. Sexual Offences Act. What's the age of consent to have sex? 16. Ayakoka. It's for an adult to have sex with a younger person, it's 16. Let me tell you now, the question now that you're thinking is, no, these are children. No? This number, ladies and gentlemen, we're almost done. We're almost done. This number was not a thumb suck. The government commissioned research before they drafted the Sexual Offences Act. And the research was tasked with finding out, when do children become sexually active? The research found that at the age 12, listen to this, at the age 12, people who participated in the research, the majority of the girls had had asexual experience at the age 12. there were less boys at that age that had a sexual experience. But at the age 12, the girls had had a sexual experience. By the age 14, the numbers were the same. So the reason, or that age there is pegged on you wanting, remember what is rape? What is a sexual offense? It's something that happens that you're not able to consent to. So now the question asks, because can you legally consent? Under 12, no. Not to sex. If you are between 12 and 16, you can't legally consent to have sex with an 18 or 30-year-old. Then that is statutory rape. The 16, you are right when you say 16, but that's statutory rape. It prevents somebody having sex with somebody that's younger than 16. But the fact of the matter is, and what I always find is, we were all young once. No? We all grew up. We all did things. But then when we suddenly grown, then that didn't exist. No? The reality, ladies and gentlemen, the reality is teenagers experiment. So what are you wanting to say? That if there's the experimentation between those ages, which is a normal part of growing up, you want to put them in jail? No. And that is what this acknowledges. It acknowledges that that happens. Remember, the Sexual Offences Act said both of them commit a crime. And then there was outrage and that was changed. Okay? So, if you look at this, remember, the law must make laws that work. If we talk about this and we talk about abortion, abortion was outlawed in apartheid. It was only allowed in limited circumstances. Rape, health, danger to the health of the mother, danger to the health of the child. Did that prevent people from going to backstreet abortionists? No. People still got abortions. The rich had money to send their kids to jurisdictions where they could get legal abortions, and the rest of us had to go to mama somewhere for a dental injection and probably ruin our life as a result of that, or died. So when we are looking at this, I want you to see do you see how it was balanced here? I'm not saying your opinion is incorrect. I'm just telling you what the current legal situation is. Okay? The balancing of that has happened there. Ma'am, I note your hand.
And we did research on gender-based violence, but one of our questions was sexual debut of girls in schools as young as 9. If you have a safe space for them to speak, you will get a lot even in primary school. Yes. And I took time to look at this question. But what we found was that these girls and teenagers were not having their first sexual experience with their age mates. It was older men. And because we don't teach sex education and we don't talk enough about sexual abuse, these kids don't know it's rape. And it is rape. So we pretend that these things are not happening. And with the advent of HIV epidemic, children are heading households. People are getting into those houses and raping these children, and they get infected with HIV. This is complex for us to be caught up in this moral, trajectory. It's really an injustice. It's really an injustice. We don't want to talk about sex with our children, and at the same time, we want them to know things. They know things from their age mates, and these older men break into the houses, and they do all sorts of things. But we don't hold the perpetrators accountable. We hold the child with the stomach accountable. I mean, what kind of a society are we? You know?
I think on that point, what is very important, you find this in schools. The girl falls pregnant, they want to kick her out of the school. Nothing happens to the boy. Why would you deprive a girl of education? Even if she decides to keep that child, an educated girl is going to be able to provide better than an uneducated girl. So, ladies and gentlemen, human rights is alive. It's the kind of things that one has to debate. But the one thing that we have to accept is children are vulnerable. Children need protection. And why do we make such a fuss about sex? Sex is normal. It's not something ungodly. It's natural to have sex. But I don't know, you make this, and then we forget. Look at our informal settlements. Look at shacks. How many rooms are in that shack? Do you think mom and dad doesn't have sex? Do you think those kids don't see what's happening and mimicking what's happening there? Yeah. No, see, we must make laws that will be fit for the society that we live in. Okay. Yes, ma'am, I have to, my time is going. There's a clip that I have to show, and there's a form that you have to make. Where's Gogo? I just want to say, Ndiabulela Sisi. Chief. Oh, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, as a concluding activity, I want you, who's organizing, who's playing? I will give you I want to show you an extract of a movie, okay? Just a little short extract of a movie. And I'm going to assess you afterwards to see whether you picked up on what we were talking about. All right, so just give us a couple of minutes. We're going to show you a part of a movie. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, what type of abuse did you see? Okay, I've got physical, I've got sexual, emotional, all of it. Did you see the cycle? Yes. Huh? She knows him much better than he knows her. You think she likes roses? No. You think the red dress would be her choice? No. It's all about him. Yeah, just in summary, there is a lot more that we can do. Unfortunately, this is all we have time for. There is an evaluation form that Millicent would like you please to complete, if you can give that to her. And then all that remains for me, with the time allowed, is to say thank you very much. You were a brilliant audience. Thank you.
1998, when we legislated the Domestic Violence Act, we thought there's progression. In 2007, when we legislated the Sexual Offences Act, the Children's Act, and so forth, the Elderly Persons Act, we thought that we are free. The Civil Unions Act, we thought that. But no, Wangari tells us that, we even ratified CEDAW, which is the Convention on Elimination on All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So we also internationally, I have said we won't violate our own women, we won't violate our children. Even the International Convention on the Rights of the Child, we have ratified it. We have surpassed America, which doesn't want to ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child, in 1989. But no, Wangari reminds us, secondly and lastly, that human rights are not things that are put on the table for people to enjoy. These are things you fight for, then you protect. With those words, enjoy your lunch. Please make sure that I have your contacts to continue the engagement. I know there's lots of people I've promised that we'll continue to have coffee, to have chats, to have formal conversations about struggles that we are facing with regard to the war which we find ourselves in this country, war against our children and our women. So let's continue to communicate. I'm available, but not on WhatsApp. Please call, I can call back, or SMS or direct call on the 0797665803 or 011-484-0390. Again, if you don't know who's speaking, this is Sarah Mota from the Foundation for Human Rights under Vulnerable Groups. I heard that there is Daily Maverick, they want to talk to us. We are here for the next hour. Enjoy your lunch, and don't forget the copy is with Millicent in the corner. Wave Millicent again for visibility. Yeah, there she is at the back corner for your manual to collect. Thank you very much. Hope to see you soon again.